we gotta take every chance we can get to get a date here. So I'm gonna iterate and say every time I click no, scale the yes button larger.
All right, so here with Robert, the CEO of Rendition. Hey, Robert.
Hey James, how are you?
Good. Really excited to talk to you today about AI generated design. But before we get into what you're building, I wanted to actually talk about what I think is a cool story. Could you tell me about how we met and Hack Night?
Yeah, so last year in San Francisco and Hayes Valley, I started a little hack night. The goal was just to co-work with some of the people I know, and it got kind of picked up by Twitter email lists. And like before we knew it, there was like 100 people there, and it kind of got, it was exciting. It was a lot of fun, but very busy. And we met at one of those. I mean, that's one of my favorite things about being in San Francisco right now is like, there's just this community of builders that I just see every weekend or every event that I go to. And that's, I really love that.
Yeah, me too. It's really an amazing place to just bump into people building cool stuff. And I felt like your Hack Night was one of the best places and will be. But can you tell me about what was the moment that you got interested in coding?
It was probably in college. I was a philosophy major and was non-technical, really had no background in like science or math or very much. I mean, I had taken some math classes, but it was purely for fun, purely for the intellectual challenge of it. But I mean, this was 2012, 2013. I mean, mobile is happening. All these big mobile apps and big companies are being formed and all these really useful things are being created. And I was really fascinated by that. But I was in Tennessee. You know, I mean, I grew up in rural Tennessee and went to school there. I didn't know anyone who even called themselves an app developer. So me and one of my roommates started tinkering a little bit, but it didn't really go anywhere. And it wasn't until I graduated with a degree in philosophy, went and actually took my first job in politics and like decided I didn't eventually want to do politics as a career, that I was like, hey, you remember that coding thing? Like, what if I just like went all in on that? And pretty soon after that, I quit my job, moved out to Silicon Valley and was like, okay, I've saved up a little bit of money from a year of working. I have like a few months where I can just like hack. And by the end of it, if I can get a job coding, then I like belong in this industry. And so that was like my flag in the ground, as I had like 6 months to get a job writing code.
And how about the design aspect? Because you're working on a product that integrates AI with design. Was that something that has always interested you, or is that more recent?
It's newer. So as I became a founder, I started just getting obsessed with not just making things that work, but making beautiful things, making things that really tapping into the emotions of the how people use software and appreciate it. My perspective on design as an engineer, especially in big tech, is like, oh, you know, it's very naive. A lot of engineers think of design as people who are able to draw really nicely curved lines and choose colors accurately. And of course, that's a major part of what design is, but it's so much more. It's everything involved in how someone feels as they're using a piece of software. And so I really have become like fanatically obsessed with that, and I really love it.
So speaking of emotions, tomorrow is Valentine's Day. Both of us are single for Valentine's Day. And you had promised me that we could make an app, or we could design an app together with AI that would help us out.
Yeah, you know, and hopefully help out a lot of people out in the world, right? How do you ask? How do you make that ask? That's the first step. So definitely, James, us coding this is going to help us. That's going to be what helps us get a date.
So we have 1 day left, so let's do it.
Let's do it. So here we are on Rendition's website. It's renditioncreate.com. And it's pretty simple UI. Basically, what Rendition helps you do is design and build user interfaces using AI. And you can just describe what you'd like to create, and Rendition will give you a couple versions of it. And so here we can select a style. I find the Airbnb styling to be really nice. We can also do custom style for startups and later stage teams. So then we can just describe what we want to build. And so here we're going to build a cute little Valentine's Day application that I originally saw, I think it's Mewtrude, do on Twitter. So we're going to ask for a small page that asks, will you be my Valentine, with yes and no options. So this is good. You want to give someone a choice when you're asking them to be your Valentine, but we want to make it cute. So I've already actually got a little GIF that we can use as an asset here. So I'll add that to the prompt.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so that's just a little link to an asset. We'll see it on the page. We submit this, and it's going to process. We start to see this code streaming in, and immediately we can actually watch the code as it comes in. We've got a nice UI here.
I think one of the coolest parts of this is being able to see the code streaming, and the code is actually functional the whole time that it's streaming.
So this one is about done here. And so now we've got our yes and no options. And we've got two versions. We've got A and B down here that we can choose from. So we can take a look here. They're pretty similar, but I like the styling on this one just subtly more. So we're going to choose this one, A in this case, to iterate based on. This is a good start, right? But I mean, hey, look, like we gotta take every chance we can get to get a date here. So I'm going to iterate and say every time I click no, scale the yes button larger.
That's
just
a good idea.
Just give them a little hint, you know, like, oh, maybe they clicked the wrong button. And so one thing to note about Rendition is the first generation, so version 0, is always going to be static or stateless. You'll have buttons, you'll have components, but you're not going to have these state hooks used. That's so Rendition can focus on the design in that first iteration. But in future iterations, you can ask for simple state, and it'll do that fairly accurately. And here we can see as we click no, the user just gets a little hint that like, hey, actually, maybe you meant to click yes. So that's a good start here. We can check our other version as well. Both are very similar and both are what we want. I might actually increase this to 0.2 to increase the amount of scale difference we have. So we can both edit with AI and we can also edit directly in the code. You can see the yes gets bigger faster here.
And that code is React JavaScript, right? That's
right. So we've got React Tailwind here and works well in a React or Next.js environment. Cool. So we've got two more things I think we want to do here. And this one is just slightly more complicated. So, okay. Keeping the scale behavior for clicking no, also make it so that when I click yes, the text changes to good. I expect flowers, right? Because you want to set expectations and also update the image source. And so we've got a different GIF that we're going to use on our success case. And I'll just paste that URL in here. So as you mentioned, this is React and Tailwind. Now, one thing I'll call out is Rendition can also generate Figma designs. So if you're like, oh, I'm just kind of concepting out, I don't know exactly what I want to build yet, we have a Figma plugin here as well that you can open within Figma. And rather than creating these in a web UI like this, it'll actually just design it for you in a Figma frame. I find that flow to be more useful for broad concepting, exploring ideas, whereas I like to do this flow instead when I know kind of what I want to build and I just want to execute on it. And especially when I want to do more of that behavioral interaction capability.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. And so we can take a look. It looks like we lost our first GIF. We got our second GIF, and this behavior messed up a little bit. Oh, actually, that's my fault. I chose the wrong GIF. Here, let me get the right GIF. This is the right GIF. So now.
Oh yeah, I see on line 12, it's setting the image to the new image.
Yeah. Set image source. Yeah, an image source is going to start right here.
Yeah.
There we go. Cool. All right. So as I click no, it gets bigger. When I click yes, it changes and says that it expects flowers.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That will do the trick.
I think that makes me pretty satisfied. So just an illustration of how we can use Rendition to create this fairly basic website, but it's still kind of fun. It's got these interactive elements here where once we change various behavior with just text prompts, we can get something that feels kind of dynamic, kind of fun, kind of enjoyable to experiment with. We're able to create it in about 10 minutes.
And Robert, how would I send this to that special someone?
The way you can send it is click the share link here, and then they will also get to enjoy the beauty of your creation. So if you click the share link, it'll share the direct version that you're working on right there.
Cool.
So here we are now in Figma. So this is the AI Design and Code by Rendition plugin here. The way you can get to this plugin is by going into the Figma Resources tab and searching for whatever plugin that you want. And so then again, it's basically the same UI, but instead of creating Tailwind components directly within our view, it's going to first create designs, and then we can easily get the code for that design whenever we want to. Mm-hmm. And so let's say a grid of a product card for a Canadian mountain trip. Okay, so same thing. We're going to get a couple different versions. But what I like about this in Figma experience is we get to just see it on this infinite canvas, and we can see all the different options at once. So it's really good as I'm iterating on the visual presence and approach that I want to do. So we'll see it stream in here. Again, we've got these three options, A, B, and C. And it's going to create these cards for us. And it's actually going to pull Unsplash images. So that's where these images are coming from. You can see them kind of randomly pulling every time it renders. And I like this because we get to see different concepts of how this UI can look. You know, maybe we want something that's just a little bit more sparse, just focused on the aesthetics, and this would be good for like a feature section. Maybe we want action, right? Where we can say book now and actually take actions based on it, or something that maybe it's just for favoriting. So based on this, we can iterate and reformat our requests so that we can continue to explore.
So what would you do to keep the one that you like?
Yeah, so one other great thing here is, let's say I like this one the best. It's simple, straightforward. So we can go and we can see here we've got our prompt in our Figma, and then also our code. So just click on our code, and then this is going to open up that same view that we had before. And here we've got the code directly for this component, just as we did for our Valentine's Day site. And then just as before, we can ask for anything we might like, add hover effects for each chip at the bottom.
So when you generate in Figma, you're generating Figma and React code at the same time?
That's right.
That's kind of crazy.
You know, even though the Figma designs, you know, they're backed in code, but I just love the experience of having this massive canvas. And if you're especially like, sometimes we just want to explore ideas, we may not need the code yet. And that's where I really enjoy using the Figma. But as you mentioned, like if you ever want to go to code, you can easily do so. And see here, we get this we got those hover effects.
Yeah. So what's the workflow typically like for building and then integrating these components like into larger applications?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I actually did a fun journey on this just a couple days ago. I was working on building an app for the Vision Pro, and I actually used Rendition to create the first front end of it. So this is the UI that I ended up building. And what we have here is basically 3 sections. We have a bottom left where we have a scrolling text transcript, a bottom right where we've got some text elements, and then a top section where we have a grid of images. And I used Rendition to do the first version of this. And then I migrated into VS Code afterwards to hook up the backend and everything like that. And so the way I typically use Rendition is I will sketch out the UI, get it lightly interactive, kind of based on like, ooh, great, this is now ready for me to hook up to a backend. And then I'll export that code. And the way I do that is just by clicking on the clipboard link here, and then I can bring that into my local development environment and hook that up to whatever data source I want to manage the routing and such within my application.
Okay, so you made some components first in Rendition, then you made a new project in VS Code, which was like a React application. You copied the components in, you ship that app, and then you open that from the Vision Pro.
Yeah, exactly right.
Cool. That's a really interesting application. What other kinds of applications have you seen people building with AI to design?
Yeah, all kinds. I mean, Rendition is really excellent for that straightforward UI, that it's like web, it's mobile. You've got boxes, buttons, borders, etc. On the screen. But you want it to look nice, right? And you want it to feel good and be interactive, but you don't want to spend 3 days writing every single line of CSS on your own. And so that's where we see Rendition really being effective, from things like a portfolio page, just kind of looking through some of our requests that we've gotten recently, event logistics for a party. We have a splash screen for a B2B apparel sourcing mobile app, all different kinds of web and mobile fashion apparel product presentations, all these kind of things.
And so as you're playing around with the Vision Pro, have you gotten any insights of like what the future of design will be like from that perspective?
Yeah, the Vision Pro is fascinating. So a couple of thoughts about how UI design is different. I would say there's really 2 biggest things. One is screen space is cheaper. So, I'm looking at a pretty big laptop right now, but to move it around or to expand it, I got to hook it up to another physical screen. In Vision Pro, you just click, drag, and everything becomes much larger. And so you have more screen space to work with. And you're going to need it because clicks are more expensive in the Vision Pro. When not hooked up to a Mac or not hooked up to a physical keyboard, clicking it's really like it takes a long time, and the virtual keyboard is not very much fun to use. And the ability to select something small, right? 2 buttons that are right next to each other is very difficult because you have to do it with your eyes. You're trusting the Vision Pro to know you're looking at this button and not this. So I see more expansive screen use and larger buttons that are farther apart from one another, and minimizing the number of clicks that it takes for a user to perform an action. So those are a couple of things that I think, just from my first impressions, are very clearly going to be necessary for developing and designing UIs on the Vision Pro.
Cool. I'm going to check back with you in a couple of months after you've spent a couple of months inside of that AR world and see if that's still the case. Final question for you is, what do you think the future of coding will be like? How do you think we'll be coding in 5 or 10 years from now?
I think that what we're seeing is among the biggest transitions since going from like punch card programming to terminal-based development. This is a massive shift in how easy it is for people to program. Now you can, with that transition, you could type into a terminal and see the result of your program executing, as opposed to stacking up your cards and turning them in. It used to be we would have to write all these lines of code ourselves. Now, I mean, that Vision Pro app, I sketched out the UI with a couple voice commands. I just talked about what I wanted to create, and Rendition made a couple sketches of it, and it was a useful UI. Now, of course, I then had to go and do a lot of manual programming, aided by ChatGPT, to build the back end and make it a full application. But boy, it's talk about democratizing the ability to build. It's a huge moment and a really exciting time to be a builder, because the skill level requirement, the amount of effort required to ship something interesting that is powered by AI, that works in the Vision Pro, in this crazy new world, or typical web interfaces, it's easier than it's ever been. And that's largely thanks to the advances in artificial intelligence recently.
Awesome. Robert, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, James.